So, hi, Amy, and welcome to the Future of Branded Content Marketing and PR, the podcast that we do. You are somebody who is an expert in movies, movie financing, movie partnerships, brand partnerships, and you've really been having working with some of the best brands in the world. So, to start with, tell us a little bit about yourself because I know that you've done so many things that it makes it difficult for me to put it all together in one part or in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. My career's had an interesting journey. I started off working with global brands in PR and doing their communication strategies at Porto Novelli. But my passion was always film and TV. That was kind of what I always wanted to do. It was just really hard to break into that industry. And I finally managed to do it thanks to a partnership that I was working on back then with Hewlett Packard and the British Film Institute. And that then got me into film. And they, at the BFI, introduced me to Lawrence Atkinson, who is owner of DDA, which is one of the preeminent film and TV publicity firms. And I came in there to set up their corporate division. And it was a baptism of fire because the film industry is so incredibly different to the way the brands work. So I went in there and I was there for the best part of 10 years. I was running their corporate division. So I was working with producers, financiers, sales agents, distributors. So I really had to start learning and understanding the business of film, how films get made, essentially, although our role was publicity and publicizing all their different roles. And then I also set up a brand division there. So brands came back to me. And that's when I started looking at how brands were partnering with filmmakers. And I could really see a gap where there was this disconnect through nobody's fault, just that brands speak a very different language to producers. And I could see that brands brought an incredible amount of value, not just the fact they had bigger budgets than filmmakers, but also the fact they really understood marketing. And that's a piece of the pie that producers, they're so creative and they're focusing on the storytelling that they're not necessarily thinking the way brands think when they're marketing products. So that's kind of where I saw this gap. And then I went up and set my own agency up to do brand partnerships. And now I find myself working with a new streaming platform called EcoFlix and working with setting them up as a streaming platform. They're not for profit, which is really interesting. And then bringing brand partners into them as well. So that's kind of a very whistle-stop tour of what I've been involved in. But it's been exciting and, really interesting space to work in.
I know you've been talking about so many exciting things. One of the examples that you gave me was earlier we spoke about HP. And, I don't think many people realize that HP is more of a film company than a printer company.
Oh, well, they're definitely a print company. That's definitely a massive part of their business. But yes, they started off in film. So they're back in 1939, when Bill and Dave were working in their garage, Disney were making Fantasia. And they were struggling with the sound quality. And they said, oh, how are we going to fix this? Get it into theatres so it's not really loud and really, quiet as an opera. And somebody said, oh, I know these two guys up in Silicon Valley, these tech guys. And they said, go and see if they can help us. And so they did. They came up with an oscillator and sold that to Disney. And that basically started Hewlett Packard. It got them out of the garage and launched the company. And ever since, they've been hugely involved in film. Their technology has powered so many of the massive special effects. And they work with some of the best special effects production companies, post-production companies. HP's got a massive heritage in film.
Not many people realize that a film is, a lot of people do realize, but we don't really give it a thought that a film is really a business, which also requires financing and probably something like venture capital. So give us a little 101 on how does a film get financed? Because I think you've been advising or helping films on financing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're so right. Films are a business. And I think that's where some filmmakers are so creative that they forget to focus on the business aspects of raising finance and how to do that. So basically, it's whenever you're looking to raise finance for a film, you've got to treat it like you would with any product that you're looking to raise finance for, any company. So when you're doing that, it's really setting up a business plan and having, a creative section. So that would include what your synopsis is, what's the story you're telling, who your ideal cast would be, as well as like who your audience is, comparative titles, where would this sit in the marketplace so people get an idea. And then also a massive component is your finance plan. So how are you going to get this financed? How are you going to fund the project? And so really there's various different things that you can look at. There's soft money, so that's money that you don't have to pay back. So that can come in the form of government funds. So for example, in the UK, we've got the BFI, and they do a lot of kind of great opportunities for new filmmakers, upcoming filmmakers, things like that you apply for, and you can get that soft money. But then also there's tax incentives. So for example, in the UK, we've got a great tax incentive, and various different countries have tax incentives. So that basically means that you can get the tax refunded back to you that you would pay on that. So it extends the budget in a sense. So that's your tax incentives. You can also do pre-sales. So that's where you sell your film ahead of having it made, and to different territories, different distributors all over the world. So pre-sales are actually really hard to do right now, because people want to see the content before they buy it. So it's more challenging. But if you can get a distributor on board ahead of time, that can come in and support the project, then that's massive. It really is massive. Or it's certainly getting their interest, where they say, yes, if you bring next to the table, we'll come in. So that's a really big piece too. You've also got debt. So that's where you go to a bank and borrow money against the project. Now, usually banks look for pre-sales. They want to see, kind of that security. Is this going to go somewhere? Is it just, kind of pie in the sky idea, or has it actually got legs? And so banks will look for a lot. And this is why your finance plan and your essentially your business plan for your film is so important, because there needs to be that sort of support and that kind of tangible asset that the banks can buy into and see, yes, this is worth us lending the money, because we know we're going to get the money back. So bank loans are, really kind of tied into your pre-sales. Then there's equity. So that's private money that comes into the film. So that's where, and that's the biggest risk. And that's usually the last piece of money that you've got to pay back. So it's high risk position, and it's very difficult to get, particularly because there's such a reputation around films not making their money back. It's difficult to recoup and that kind of thing. So that's your equity piece. Then you might get in-kind equity. So for example, kind of post-production companies might come in and discount their fees or give you the post-production for free in return for equity. So they provide in-kind services. So that's something else. And then the piece of the pie that I was really interested in was brand partnerships. Could brand partners come in and provide that equity piece that's really hard for filmmakers to find? So that's kind of another part of the finance.
Let's just jump into that's a really that's interesting to segue into my next question, which was about brand partnerships. And I know that you have been that's really one of your key fortes, of course, as a public relations and communications firm. So how do brand partnerships work? How do people approach companies? How do you start off with them? Give us another lowdown or a brief class on having brand partnerships in your movies.
Well, there's so many different ways brands can get involved in films. And of course, brands have been supporting films for a very long time. Even back in the 1960s, when Procter & Gamble actually started off in radio, funding radio shows that basically became, kind of the soap operas that we know today on TV, like Coronation Street and things like that. So brands have really kind of been in this world for a very long time. But I think what's happened is brands have kind of really moved into the product placement space in a big way. Whereas back in the 1960s, it was about the storytelling, and then adverts would be supporting that content and be, yes, there would be some products in there, but it was very much around the advertising either side at the breaks in between in the segments. So now brands can do various different things. They can do contra deals. So something that they've been doing with studios for a long time is where no money actually changes hands between the two partners. but media spend is committed. So a brand may commit, X million in media spend, and that's enough, and that in exchange for marketing collateral and assets. But what I was really interested in was, like I said, this equity piece. Was there something else brands could be doing where they could maybe spend less and get more back? So essentially what we're looking at is getting brands to come in with, sort of 20% equity into a production. And that's, that's just a guide. It can be less, it can be more. And in return, they get the marketing collateral. But the big thing about this is, it's, like I said, it's not product placement. It's very much about synergy and, what a brand is at its core. So, for example, with EcoFlix is all about the environment, climate action, nature, animals, and looking after the planet. And so finding a brand that really has that at its core and, is championing that message, and has been for a long time. It's not just a brand jumping on a bandwagon. It's a brand that really is already in that space. And funnily enough, HP's been doing a lot in that space already. They're working with the Trillion Tree campaign. They've got incredible, sustainable printers now, where you print something and it automatically, if you opt in, it'll automatically report back to HP, and HP will plant a tree on your behalf. So they're helping make their customers carbon neutral. So there's, they're already doing that and have been for a long time. So finding partners that really connect and are an authentic match, rather than it being something they're jumping on. So you look for that first, and then they're able to come on board potentially with some finance to help you make the production itself. But then the big thing that they add is this marketing machine, because particularly in the independent film space, it's usually just a small team of producers and they don't have the backing of a big studio. And that's where a brand can really come in and add enormous value between their advertising teams, their social teams, their social and digital teams, their PR teams. That can really come in and really help a film find its audience, and not only just find a new audience potentially for a brand, but connect with the brand's existing audience. So, the types of collateral that you would get from marketing a film would be behind the scenes footage, first look stills. There's, for example, let's just say we had someone like Leonardo DiCaprio suddenly out in the Amazon reporting back to us. We could then have a clip of that, and as a teaser say, look, Leo's in the Amazon, or, and get people excited. Oh, what's he doing there? So it's that teasing marketing collateral that you have. Trailers, and then of course you've got the film festivals where you go to raise awareness if you're trying to sell your films to other distributors, and that's where they all congregate, where there's big markets for buying and selling movies. So there's a wealth of assets for a brand to work with and push out on their own social media channels, as well as seed to the media. So there's enormous amount to work with in film, definitely.
Can you give me some examples, some real examples of brands that you have worked with, where you created some brand partnerships, and how successful they were? What was the result? How did the movie or the brand benefit?
There's been a lot. One of the first brands I worked with was Swarovski. They've been working in film for a very long time, for years and years and years. And what's lovely about them is that their products are so seamlessly integrated into costumes. So they've done a lot of work with Disney. They've done a lot of work they've even got involved in a film called Romeo and Juliet, starring Douglas Booth. And they did a lot. So we worked with them, and they did a big wrap party in Cannes. So they're very much about, the reason they chose Romeo and Juliet was because it's such a beautiful like a big love story. It's one of the epic love stories ever, and that's very much in Swarovski's brand essence. So that worked really well for them. And then we had obviously Hewlett Packard, and I keep mentioning them because I've been working with them for years, and I love them. They're an incredible brand, and they got involved with Manto, which is actually the poster behind me, an Indian film, and it was a short. Manto was an incredible short story writer in the late 1930s, 1940s, and particularly during the partition of India. and he wrote, he gave a voice to the voiceless. And HP's big print message, as we were saying earlier, they're a massive print company, and their message is the power of ink, the power of our words, and the fact that our words, when printed, can last lifetimes and be changed into multiple languages. And as Manto's work was, and his work was as relevant today as it was in the past. He really empowered women, and he had a fascination with the underbelly of society, how they survived and what they had to endure. And he risked his freedom to tell these stories. He was tried for obscenity 7 times and never convicted. And he never stopped. He fought, he always stood up for society. And he said, if you don't like my stories, you don't like society. So it was incredible. And that HP got involved in that movie. It premiered in Cannes as part of Uncertain Regard. And when I say Cannes, I mean the Cannes Film Festival, not the Cannes Lions. So it was an incredible accolade for their first film. And Nandita Das wrote and directed it. Incredible actress from India and writer and director, producer. Nawaz Siddiqui starred as Manto. He was absolutely incredible. He was the spitting image of Manto. It was amazing. And he got huge critical praise from that role. So it did really well. Now that movie's on Netflix. So that's HP getting, I think that's one of the first times, if not the first time, a brand has actually co-financed, co-produced a movie that is on Netflix worldwide. So that was like a massive, massive success story, and just showed, we had a #1 hashtag in India. 20 million people were tweeting about the movie in a day, 24 hours. So there was real engagement, because that's the thing with films, particularly true stories like Manto, where they're inspirational, they connect with audiences. They have a life of its own, and the media love all this, because this is the sort of content that drives audiences. So, for example, kind of as a publicist, when I'm working with Nawaz Siddiqui and we're doing interviews, obviously it's kind of quite specific to India, but there's a huge Indian audience internationally beyond India that are fascinated and love these stories. And personally, I love Manto. When I started researching him and reading his stories, so incredibly inspiring, and it's an incredible film. I recommend people who've got Netflix, they watch it. It really is a beautiful film. But yeah, it's incredible, really.
How is Netflix different from regular films? Is there a difference in branding? Is there a difference in publicity? Is there a difference in branded content? How do you treat it? Do you treat it any different from a movie that comes out in a regular cinema hall?
Oh, well, Netflix obviously is a streaming platform, but it's essentially the same. They still have campaigns for their films, absolutely. But the big thing is there's no adverts, and nothing's overly branded, and they're kind of really strict about product placement and not doing that. So it's in terms of a brand wanting to get onto Netflix, which is the holy grail, because that's where millions of people are, and brands chase audiences. So if you want to be getting involved and in front of these audiences, you've got to be clever about it, and it's not about overselling. And I think that's where we got into a state, sort of time period where it was like jumping on bandwagons, like branding everything. Everything was logo everywhere. You just had to look at James Bond to see how ridiculous it got, and it's now almost kind of they're poking
how does the company make money on Netflix?
Well, in terms of like a brand, the brands can't get onto Netflix. Like you have to be authentically telling a story, and that's where partnering with filmmakers, and really good filmmakers, they're at the top of their game, that know how to storytell. That's the way that you can get in. But it's not about your logo, and it's not about putting the brand front and center. It just won't happen. But that's not, consumers are so smart. They can see when something's being sold to them. And this isn't about brand awareness. a lot of the brands that I'm working with, everybody's heard of them. This is about brand likability and emotional connection to your brand. And the way you do that is through, yeah, absolutely, storytelling and getting involved in something that is, kind of integral to the brand. So with HP, diversity is just so important to them and has been for a very long time before it became cool. HP was doing its best to be diverse and to level the playing field, and that was just through all their HR and how they operated. And of course, brands and companies get it wrong sometimes, and they're always trying to do better. But that was something that was really important to HP as a brand. So it's that's kind of why they kind of moved into doing what they did with Mantle. It made perfect sense for them to work with Nandita Das, who is obviously an icon in India. She's legendary. She's the top of her game, and it made perfect sense to partner with her. And this story was a story that needed to be told. It was very timely. It was about a male feminist, fundamentally, from the 1940s. And this all came out, the movie came out, it just so happened during the Me Too movement, the height of the Me Too movement. So it was kind of, the timing was right for this film, and it was a perfect synergy with HP. And so that's why it ended up on Netflix. There's no laptops in this movie. There's, HP wasn't around back then. It was only just being kind of developed. So there was no HP. So of course it wasn't going to feature in the film. But that wasn't why HP was doing it. I mean, interestingly, behind the scenes, it was HP technology. It was HP laptops being used. It was all HP for special effects. Of course, they were integral to making the film. But really, it was the marketing that was the important piece. And that was where HP was able to sort of say, look, this is something we care about. And that's important to us. And starting a conversation around what the film's themes were was the most powerful thing. So that's kind of what this is about, rather than logos and that kind of thing.
Wow, that's quite a story, Aimee. And we could go on talking about brands and content and branded content and movies, but we do have a time stop, on the show. But it was wonderful talking to you, and I look forward to having even better and more conversations with you in the future, and having probably a few more episodes with you on the show. But for now, thank you so much. And it was wonderful to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. This was amazing. Brilliant.